Hello, so today our painting is called Good Old Days, but before I get right into it, there's a couple of things I want to go over with you. First of all, feel free to paint today at your own pace, so if you need to hit the pause button, if you need to rewatch anything, you can always do that. Also, if you want to get creative and change things up, maybe do some different colors, go for it. And you're going to need a few tools, so let's go over those. To start, I've got my canvas today. I'm using a 16 by 20, but you could use any size that you have. You can also use paper if that's what you've got. You're also going to need some paint. So we've got 6 colors here. I've got my primaries, my yellow, blue, and red, and then I've also got some white, black, and brown. You'll want to have 3 paint brushes. So I've got a large brush here, a medium brush, and then I've got a small little brush here to do some detailing with. One other tool that I have with me today is a ruler here, because we are going to be doing some straight lines. You definitely can freehand these if you want, or if you prefer, just grab yourself a ruler or something with a straight edge. And then of course your jar of water and your rag so that you are able to rinse out those brushes between color changes. All right, so let's get going. Right off the bat, we're gonna start with our background. So the view sort of through the window. So what we wanna do, sort of before we even do that, is just get an idea of where our window frame is gonna go. We're gonna fix it up later on, make it nice and straight. But for now, we just wanna figure out exactly where we're gonna put it. So I'm gonna grab a tiny, tiny, tiny little speck of blue here. And I'm just gonna mix with a bit of white. I want with the lightest possible blue that you can get. And you'll just need a little bit. We're just gonna do a quick rectangle sketch here. So I like my frame to be, I'm gonna go with my ruler and do about roughly like 1.5 width. You can eyeball it though. There's no specific measurement. We're just looking to get a nice sort of thick window frame around the edge, maybe even 2 rulers thick. So I'm just going to use my ruler as a guideline, give myself a quick little mark. Again, it's really, really rough right now because we'll make this look better later. But all we want to do is figure out how large we need to create the background here. So I'm just going to create this quick, really sketchy version of a window frame. Doesn't need to be pretty at all. That'll do. And now as I'm coloring in this middle section where we're looking through the window, I know that I need to make sure I cross all of these lines. If I don't come up to these lines, I'm going to end up with white canvas between my background and my window frame. So that's why these lines don't matter. We are going to be painting over them right now. I'm going to rinse out that brush. Grab my large paintbrush. And again, I'm going to start with light blue. I might go slightly darker than this and make a little bit more. Just a nice summer or spring sky color. Okay, mix that into my bristles. And I'm going to come up to my canvas and I'm going to go right across, covering up that line that I drew. So I'm just filling in this inner rectangle here right now. And I'm just going to work back and forth. And every now and then, I'm just going to grab white. Just to make the sky a little bit more interesting. Add a little bit of maybe some delicate cloudiness to it. Go back into blue. So right here, make sure that you always cross that line all the way across, both sides. And as I work my way down, I want to start to get lighter and lighter and lighter with this blue. So I'm just going to keep grabbing more white and let that mix with the blue that's already in my brush so that it's just going to turn into a lighter blue. I'm not adding any more blue at all. unless it starts to get too white. If it gets to the point where it just looks white, you may need a little speck of blue again. So I'm going to come down probably a good 3/4 of the way down this window. Make sure again that I've crossed all those lines. Don't want to see them, so I'm just going to kind of go over top of those a little bit with some pressure just to erase those lines that are there. Because they're still wet, we can make them disappear. Okay. And now all I want to do is just sort of smooth this out and make it look the way that, however I want it to look for my sky. So I'm just going to kind of pull across, work my way down, smoothing those brush strokes. You could add more blue or more white into any spots if you want to. Try and keep those brush strokes nice and flat. Okay, and that looks pretty good. I'm going to rinse out this brush and get some color down at the bottom here. So the next thing is going to be some grass. So I'm going to start with like a really pale green. So I'm just going to grab a little bit of blue here, grab some yellow, mix those up a little bit. Definitely you're going to want more yellow than blue. Going to throw a bit of white in there too. Perfect, and now I'm just going to start going across. So right where my sky left off, I'm going to go all the way across. I'm not too concerned about it being straight because we're going to actually be adding more texture to that later on. You just want to throw in some color. So again, I'm not going to color the whole section. I'm just throwing in some green in the center. I'm going to wipe off my brush. You could rinse it, but I'm lazy sometimes, so I'm just going to wipe mine off. Grab some yellow. And I'm going to use that to fill in the rest of the area. So as I do that, you'll see the yellow kind of mixes with the green. And again, making sure we're going right down to those lines and then just working it across to smooth everything out. Add in little green streaks if you want to, maybe some white streaks. It just depends. Some people like a lot of texture in their paintings, other people like them to be very blended. So I'm going to start out fairly blended and then add in my texture a little bit later. All right, so the next thing that we need to do is just kind of let this dry a little bit, and then we're going to start to work on our window frame. So we can start by sort of mapping that out again, only this time doing a much cleaner job. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my little paintbrush and my ruler. And I'm going to come up to my canvas and I'm going to start with my line across the top, down the sides, and so on. So just to sort of sketch in the shape, I'm just going to use teal because that's the color that my window frame is going to be. So I'm just going to grab myself a little bit of yellow here, throw a bunch of blue into it. Make yourself up like a fairly good sized pile. You don't want to run out. Just going to mix those up. You should start to see slight color change. It's going to get darker. It shouldn't go green. If you want to test it out, spread it out a little bit on your plate and you should see a nice bright teal. It's a little darker than I want to go, so I'm also going to throw some white in there too. Okay, that looks pretty good. So I'm just going to wipe off the excess off of my bristles here, just giving a light little swipe on either side. Come right up to the canvas, and I'm going to do roughly 2 rulers thick. My ruler's not quite as big as my canvas, so I'm just going to sort of stick it in the middle here. And right underneath that, draw a nice line right across. And you want to be careful when you're removing your ruler that you just kind of pull it up. You never want to pull it into the background, because what will happen is you'll get a little bit of a smudge there. And every time you do that, you want to give your ruler a little wipe. So you can use your rag, or if you've got an apron, sometimes I just wipe it on my stomach. Just taking off any of that paint. All right, and then again, I'm going to come down the side next. So I'm just going to guess about roughly 2 rulers in. Try and start up where I left off. Make sure I've got it straight. Pull that brush down. Again, just being careful I'm not smudging inwards to the center. Continue this line a little bit longer here. My ruler is just too short. There we go. Give it a wipe off. Same thing on our other side here. And again, like, don't worry too much about perfection, because when we're done, this isn't going to be a brand new, freshly painted window frame. It's going to be a little bit faded and a little bit rickety even on the edges. So these straight lines right now aren't going to be perfectly straight in the finished painting. And then again, one more time. So about 2 rulers thick across the bottom here. Make sure it looks fairly level. Okay. Wiping that off, and then again, one more spot that we want to throw in, one more frame, is right across the center. It should be roughly the same thickness. So I'm gonna just judge and figure out where the center of my window approximately is. We'll go with about here. I'm gonna put the ruler just above that. Go right across the top. And again, roughly 2 finger width or 2 ruler widths. Stick it on there, and we'll put one more line across the bottom. Carefully pull that off. Set your ruler aside, and that is going to be your guidelines for this window frame. So all we have to do now is just color it in. So you can rinse that little brush. And I'm going to go ahead and use my larger brush to fill this in. So I'm going to start it with that teal color, lots of that on my brush. Right across the top edge of my canvas. And I'm just going to work down to my line and be very, very careful to just kind of follow along that line and not cross it. It's better too if you don't have too much paint on your brush, because what can happen is if you've got any extra blobs of paint or a little bit of extra water in your brush, you could get drips or splashes kind of coming down into these areas where we definitely don't want to have teal paint. So just paint carefully. Don't be too wild with your brush. I'm just making sure that my paint's fairly thin, but that I am getting good coverage. We don't want to see the canvas popping through. And if for whatever reason you do kind of hit the line there like I just did, especially on this side, I'm not concerned because I'm going to be adding a tree in there. But we will be doing a little bit more of a dark outline later on, and you can camouflage any small little smudges with that. This window frame, it could be done in any color. Teal doesn't fit your decor, or it's just not your favorite color. You could use something more neutral, just like maybe some browns for wood or grays, or any color, because you could paint your window frame in your home any color at all. And if you do happen to run out of paint, so I just made a little bit more there quickly, but if you do happen to run out, you want to try and match your color close, but if it's not perfect, don't sweat it, because we're, again, going to be kind of making this look old and a little bit more rustic and faded. So if it's not exactly the same color, you won't even notice. Okay, so I've got a quick coat there on the outside frame, and I'm just going to do this center bar here. Just like to thicken up these lines a little bit, just so as I'm filling it in, it's a little easier. Okay. Smooth that out a little. All right, so we are completely filled in. We are going to be doing our outside edges, but I would just wait until the end, because a lot of this blending and stuff that we want to do is a bit easier if our paint is not fully dry. So we're going to finish off that frame completely, and then we'll worry about wrapping around the sides later on. So to get these sort of faded and older areas in this wood, we want to use a tiny bit of black here and there. We're going to use little bits of white here and there just to get different variations. So I'm going to start with white, and I'm just going to use my dirty brush, but I'm going to dip just sort of the tips of the bristles into a little bit of white, and then just sort of pick and choose some spots. So maybe in here I'd brush some of that up and down, blend it in a little. And here's where you have a little freedom too. Again, you can blend a lot or just a little bit. And I'm just going to pick and choose random spots here and there where I want to maybe lighten it up a little bit. Could even just throw in some blobs like this and then sort of go over and soften them later. Could go over some of those spots another time if you want to even brighten them up a little bit more. Okay, so next thing we want to do is put a little bit of the shading in. So again, I'm just going to wipe off my brush. I don't really need to rinse it off. Grab a really small bit of black. So you can kind of see that there. It's really tiny, and I'm actually going to kind of tap that off a couple of times just to work it into the bristles. Make sure I don't have too much on there. You can always add more, but you can't take it away if you've got too much. So I'm just going to pick and choose now some darker spots, maybe up in this corner. I might lightly brush a little of that black in. Down on the bottom here. There's no wrong place to put it. Anywhere that you want to kind of darken it up. So maybe not right over top of where you put white, but pick different spots. And again, it's totally up to you how much you blend these or don't blend them. But the more different tones that you sort of get in there, the more interesting it is. Do some thicker areas, some thin areas, just by turning your brush. So using kind of the edge of your bristles or the flat side of your brush, you can change it up a little bit. And you can always add a little bit more of this later on if you want as well. So doesn't mean this has to be final product, but the last thing that we want to do before we sort of move on is give your brush a little wipe. If you're worried about it, you can even just give it a quick rinse, dry it off. We just want to set the direction of our wooden panes. So I'm going to kind of just make sure that these two horizontal bars, the top and bottom, I want them to go all the way across. So I'm just smoothing the paint in that direction. Same down here. And again, it doesn't matter. You could have your vertical bars in front. And go horizontal. I think that's all I'm going to worry about. I want to make sure I don't have any lines sort of coming out here, so like you could just smooth down the sides. All right, so we're going to let that dry a little bit. We are going to come back in and add a lot more detail, some cracks, some more highlighting, and maybe even some knots. But while that's drying a bit, we're going to move back into our view out the window. We're going to add in our tree. We're going to fix up this grass a little bit more. So we'll just rinse out that big brush. Give it a good dry off. And let's start with our tree. So I'm going to go with my small brush to kind of work the edge a little bit, and then we'll probably switch over to the medium brush just for a bigger brush stroke. So I want to create this sort of brownish gray color for the bark. So I've got my brown paint, I've got a little black and white here. So I'm just going to grab a bit of black, mix that with a bunch of brown. Do that a couple times. I want this brown to get a little bit darker. There we go. It's like a nice hot fudge color. And then I'm going to throw a bit of white into that, just a little bit at a time, to sort of soften that color. Okay, that looks pretty darn good, so I'm gonna go with that. Okay, so I'm gonna take my brown, and I want my tree to pretty well go from almost the top to almost the bottom. So I might stop it a little early to give myself a bit of freedom here, but I'm just gonna follow that line right down the edge of my frame. Come down the grass a little bit. Stop there for now. And then I'm just going to rinse that out and switch to my medium brush here to finish this off. Same color. I'm just going to create the shape of a tree. So I want the trunk to be a little bit thicker at the bottom. So I'm just going to guess here. Go with that. Come down. Doesn't need to be perfectly smooth. Bark is bumpy. And then I want to just start to create this feeling of roots, but I want them to be soft down here. So I don't want much paint on my brush. I'm going to swipe it off, dip into a tiny little bit of white so I lighten my color. And then just start to bend over to the right. And we're just making the bottom of the tree here kind of rough. We don't want any sharp, blunt lines. And then I'm just going to start filling it in. So I'm using a little bit of a combination of my brown and that lighter brown here, just to blend everything together. Carefully underneath that window frame, just finish it off. Make sure you don't have any white between your tree and your window frame. And then just work to fill it all in. Don't worry about variations in color. That's a good thing. If you've got lighter areas, darker areas. We're actually going to purposely add a little bit more texture to that in a minute here, but I'm just going to finish off the top of the tree first. So I just want to kind of line it up. Could be slightly narrower because as a trunk it would go up, it would get a little bit skinnier. Come across, fill that all in. And up. And I'm going to bring my tree nice and tall right up to the top here. All right, and I want to give that texture like I was saying, so I'm just going to grab little bits of white, kind of like we did with the window frame, just sort of chuck those in, blend them a little bit. You do not have to use a perfectly straight brush stroke for this. You can wave it just a little bit. You don't want to go crazy, but you can even do that with a tiny little bit of black. And then we need to add some branches. So I'm going to keep going with my medium brush. If you've got a flat medium brush, that's the one to use. If yours is a little bit fluffier, you might be better off going with your small brush. But I'm just going back into some of my brown here. And then up in this upper section of our window, I'm going to create a branch. So I'm just going to have that sort of come up and over, fairly straight. Doesn't need to be perfectly straight, but just somewhat level. And as I get near the end, I'm going to press really light so that it gets really thin. Or if your brush just doesn't want to go thin, switch to your small brush for the end of your tapered branch there. This is a branch that's going to be holding our swing, so I do want to make sure it's a little thicker. We would not want that swing to fall. It's definitely not as thick as your trunk. It's still a fairly thin line. And it would be a little thicker where it's coming out of your tree. And then I'll throw another branch in there, just a little higher up. I'm going to bring that one right up to my window frame. And don't forget to, if these lines just aren't working nice and crisp, switch to your small brush. There's no problem with that. And then just a little bit of texture in these so they match with the rest of the tree. A little bit of white, a little touch of black. Okay, rinse out that medium brush. We are going to let that completely dry. And while that's it's drying, we'll come back down to our grass here. So we're going to add some more texture down into this grass. So again, I'm still going to go with my medium brush. But a flat brush will work best for this. Just meaning that your bristles, they're not fluffy. If you can kind of see that. They're nice and flat. So I'm going back into some of that green that I made earlier. I've got a bit left here. Swiping my brush on both sides so that the bristles are flat. And then I'm just going to come across the top of my grass and using the edge of my brush, not the flat side, just on the edge. I'm going to press lightly and just start to flick up and work my way all the way across. Different lengths, so some a little shorter, some just a little bit longer. Make sure they're pretty well all joined. We want these really close together. A little bit of space in between here and there is okay. But don't think about it too much. They can go in different directions. They could have a slight curve. We don't want them to be wavy. But a slight curve is okay. Once you get all the way across, I'm going to move in and I'm just going to throw a few more. Down here, just give it a little bit more texture. If you need to adjust your green a little bit to make it maybe a little darker, maybe a little lighter. I'm not going to do this everywhere, but just throwing in the odd little bit texture maybe around the bottom of your tree. If there's anything that you want to sort of hide at the bottom of your tree, throw in a few little streaks of grass. And And then I'm just going to sort of go over that with some highlighting. So just giving my brush a quick wipe. Maybe get a little bit of white and yellow with a touch of that green. For a really yellowy kind of lime green. And just kind of go back over top of what I did. All right, perfect. And as you're doing that, you just want to be careful, especially down this edge, that you don't go into that window frame. If there's anything else you want to texturize, like maybe we want to just throw in a couple little dark streaks of green down there, or maybe a few little pale streaks. And kind of smudge it in with your brush a little bit. Just breaking that area up. Rinse out your brush when you're done. All right, let's get that swing put in. So we need to do the strings coming down and the seat. So let's start with our string. So I'm going to grab my smallest little brush. Make sure you've got one where your bristles are really tight together. It could be an angle brush or a pointy brush. And I'm just going to use the same brown that I've used on my tree here. So I'm going to grab a little bit of this. Wetting my brush, very important. It's going to help that line go on a bit smoother. And then giving it a little swipe on both sides in the paint. Before you go to the canvas, just have a look. Make sure there's no blobs of paint on there. And then just sort of decide how wide you think your swing should be. So I'm just going to use my fingers as a guideline. And I'm going to put two little bits of rope kind of coming around the tree. So you know what, let's grab a tiny bit of white because we want this to show up. And mix that into what we had on the brush. Just so it's a touch lighter than your tree. And then I'm going to do two almost letter C's. Right across the branch there, just so it looks like that rope. It's kind of wrapping around our tree. And from there, we're going to come straight down again, though. I'm going to use my fingers. So I'm just going to draw down to the window frame here. And I'm just going to use very light pressure. Like I am hardly touching the canvas. I'm not worried about this being straight or smooth. Could be a frayed old rope, which might be a little bit dangerous, but hey. So we're going to come right down to touch the top of that window frame. Make sure that they are hopefully going nice and straight, and then I'm going to pull my fingers down again lightly here, figure out where they should end. And up right about here, continue that down. Okay, and that should be low enough, so I'm going to put my swing in next. So this time I will go back to that slightly darker brown here. And we're going to create a rectangle, but the edges, so the sides, are going to have a little bit of an angle to them. So they're going to be angling this way. So the top is just going to be even slightly on an angle itself, kind of down towards the right, just a little bit wider than your string. Angle down to the left, and join those up. And then you can just go ahead and fill that in. It's wood, so we're going to give it a little texture again, grabbing a tiny bit of white on the brush. Brush that across. Maybe, again, just a itty bitty bit of black on the brush. Just giving it a little bit of a wood green feel. And then right around the edge, so the bottom and the right hand side, I'm going to go into white, tap off my brush. And just carefully, I'm going to go right across that edge and up the side, just to make it look a little bit more 3D, so that we're looking at the edge of the wood there. Okay. Perfect, and we want to make this rope look like it is attached to the swing. So I'm going to put sort of 2 little black hooks. So I'm getting a tiny bit of black on my brush, really making sure I swipe off both sides. And then I'm just going to draw a little curved line on both sides right underneath the rope. Just clean off your brush, grab that rope color, and just bring that right down to your little hook. Perfect. All right. So we still want to make sure that this is completely dry before we add in any leaves. So we'll leave that for a while, and we're going to come back and work on this window frame a little bit. So I like to add in even more highlighting and faded areas. So I'm going to go back to my medium brush, and we're still kind of working with that teal section here. You don't need to have much of your teal though, because we're just going to be adding white, making a much lighter version of it. So whatever is left on your plate, just kind of put some white into there. Flatten out your brush, take off the extra paint, and then just, again, pick and choose spots where maybe you want to throw in some lines, maybe a little bit of a shaded area here. These lines don't need to be perfectly straight. It's better if they have a little bit of a swirl to them. These work really well in the areas that are bright. It just kind of works to brighten them up even a little bit more, accentuate them. Don't need much paint on your brush. And as always with a lot of these kind of details, I think less can be more. So you don't need to go crazy adding a ton of it in. Just do a little bit, because you can always go back and add more after. So we've got some of those lighter areas in. Make sure a little bit more up here. And then I want to go in and I want to add some knots. So for these knots, I'm going to use black paint, and I'm going to use the small brush. So a couple of ways, there's a lot of different ways that you can create knots, but I'm going to show you a couple examples here on a plate. So you can have kind of a long sort of oval, very wiggly shape like that. Maybe with a little bit of a V in the center, might be a bit darker. Maybe it's a little bit simpler. anything sort of showing a knot in your wood. So I'm gonna come up to the canvas and throw in a few. So I might do maybe 3 on the painting. Again, you don't want to go crazy and do a ton of them and have it take away from everything. So pick and choose where you want them to go. I'm gonna put one right down in this corner here to start. And we'll accentuate these again with a little bit more white paint later on. So they're just really funny shapes. There's no right or wrong way. And then other than just a couple of knots like that, we're gonna throw some cracks into this wood. So make sure your board is going the same direction as your board. So I'm just gonna throw in some black cracks. It's old, not too many. Be different lengths, different thicknesses, so you can control that by how hard you press. The lighter you press, the thinner, the more delicate your lines are going to be. The harder you press, you get a bit of a thicker line. And then I'm just rinsing out my brush. I'm going to grab white and mix that into even more of this teal here. So I'm getting like, I want this to be white, but just with a tiny touch of teal in it. Super, super light. And then kind of like I did with the cracks, but maybe accentuating some of these light areas a little bit more. And in the knots too, just adding some white lines. Kind of inside, sort of following the shape a little bit. It's just really going to help to make them pop a little bit more. So that pretty well takes care of our window frame, other than some outlines, but we're going to do those at the very end. So I'm just going to rinse out that little brush. And by now our tree should be pretty dry, so we can come up here and we can start doing our leaves. So this for me is going to be kind of spring, maybe they're blossoms instead of leaves. I'm going to go with purple just because I love purple and teal together. You could totally do green or fall colors if you prefer, or you could leave it bare and have it more late fall painting. But I'm going to throw some purple blossoms in here. So I'm going to make my purple. I'm going to mix together a bunch of red, a little bit of blue. Just mix, mix, mix. It's going to start to turn into this sort of dark purple here. It's a little hard to tell again what your color looks like when they're dark. So just take some, spread that out nice and thin, and you'll get a better idea. I'm going to add a little bit of white there too. I do want to start out fairly dark, but not quite that dark. Brighten it up a little bit. Okay, I love that. So I'm going to go with this. I'm going to take some of that off my brush. There's a lot on there. Now here is the an option where if you have a fluffier brush, that can be worked to your advantage. So something even that has like a round tip, sort of like this one, or even fluffier than that, and you could even go a little bit bigger with a fluffy end. I'm still going to use the medium brush that I've been using all along because it can have the ability to go a bit fluffy if I bang it on the edge of my plate here a little bit. So I'm just sort of spreading those bristles out a little. And then I'm going to come up to my tree and I'm just going to start dabbing. If you want something that's a little less textury, you can always kind of do little swipes. Especially if your brush will not go fluffy, little swipes can work. Or you can just do a combination of the two. So I'm just throwing in a bunch of these dabs. We're not dabbing right on top of the branch. I'm kind of going above it, below it, and sometimes right on it. Kind of focusing more to the ends of the branches, even a little bit longer than the branches. They don't have to be all connected. They can be floating a little bit. That's just fine. And then really carefully, kind of underneath the window frame here, I'm going to do some dabs just to show that there's branches still above the top of this window that we can't see. And some of those leaves are peeking down. So that's about all I'm going to do. I'm not going to go nuts because I'm also going to layer on top of this some lighter colors just to get some more texture in there. So wiping off my brush, grabbing a little white, smushing that into my brush again, and then I'm just going to go over top, not thinking too much about where I'm going, but just sort of dabbing in and around the dots that I've done already. And then one more time, straight white. Work that into those bristles a little bit. And just throw a little bit of that right on top of these blossoms here. So you'll have some really bright ones, some medium purple ones, and some really dark ones. Okay. When you're happy, just give your brush a rinse. And all that's left to do now is just sort of give this nice outline, this nice defined edge to our window frame. So smallest brush, black paint. And here's where you don't need to worry too much if your lines are smooth. So if you've got a bit of a shaky hand, that's okay. It's just going to add a little bit more of a rustic feel to the whole painting. I would not try to attempt using a ruler here. It's better if it has a little bit of a shake to it. So you can put a bit of water into your black paint just by dipping your brush in and mixing it in. Swipe, swipe. Take off the excess. We don't want blobs on our brush. And I'm going to come down here to start. So I wouldn't worry about thickness either. If you press a little bit harder and you get a thicker line, or you press a little bit lighter and it's a bit thinner, vary it. Don't have your line exactly the same all the time. So I'm going to start up here, pressing, pull down, press in hard again. So it's a little thinner and thicker in areas. And then again, I'm going to come across the bottom. Not worrying about it being perfect and straight. Just following the edge as my guide. Right down this side. And right across the top. It's really hard to talk and do these lines at the same time. Okay, so that's one outline. I'm going to come down and do the same exact thing down here. And then maybe just a few little kind of lines around some of these corners. And then just have a look if there's anything else that you want to add to this. Like if you want to put in a few more little cracks anywhere, maybe another knot, maybe some more highlighting into your wood. But we are basically finished with that frame. I might throw in a couple more cracks here and there. The other thing that we can add is, because this is an old window frame, we want the glass in the window to also have that really old feel. So sometimes you'll see kind of almost like a wrinkled effect maybe to your glass if it's really old. So we're going to put in just a few diagonal lines, and we want to use the lightest blue that you can make. So I'm just going to mix again some blue, tiny little blue dot here into some white using my small brush. Really, really light. There we go. Gonna get rid of the excess paint. Just gonna give it a good swipe there. And then I'm just gonna do some diagonal lines. So I'm gonna keep them all on the same angle. Nice long lines too, just so they don't look like raindrops. Right through the glass. Be careful around your tree because some of that purple is probably still wet. And that is it. So the last step. Make sure, as always, that you sign your artwork whatever color you want. I'm just going to use one that's slightly lighter than the background. And all finished. Until next time, keep painting. We'll see you soon. Bye.